The mill, in a sense, is the main character in our story. The others? George Brumley, the most powerful man in town, the most powerful man in Camden County, Georgia, because he runs the mill. Brumley's closest ally, Robert Harrison. He is the attorney for the mill, attorney for the town of St. Mary's. Until he was defeated in the last election, he was also state legislator for the district. Suzanne Bloodworth, a St. Mary's teenager, who leveled charges of rape against her doctor, who had defeated lawyer Harrison in that last election. The man alleged to have committed the rape, the man who defeated lawyer Harrison, Dr. Carl Drury.
Today, it's estimated that on professional and college sports, the bookmakers are turning over something like $100 billion a year.
You have to put up $110 to win 100. Well, there's no maximum to the amount of money you can bet.
And that money is not bet by professional gamblers, but by respectable middle America.
I'm Morley Safer.
I'm Mike Wallace. Those stories and more tonight on 60 Minutes. First, these headline items. Secretary of State Rogers has interrupted his European mission, and Henry Kissinger has again postponed his scheduled mission to Japan in order to confer with President Nixon tomorrow morning on what to do next about the military situation in Vietnam. And the President has called a meeting of the full National Security Council for later tomorrow morning, indicating that a major decision is rapidly approaching. Meantime, reports from the field near Hue say that South Vietnamese lines there are holding under an umbrella of U.S. jets, while the North Vietnamese are reported gathering their forces for a renewed assault. 60 Minutes continues in a moment.
Special announcement from Motorola. This actual closed-circuit picture is on a Quasar 2 color TV with a 21-inch diagonal screen, plus works-in-a-drawer TV design, plus plug-in modules for ease of service, plus Instamatic tuning to help keep color balanced, plus a remote control unit without numerous color controls, so the system is less complicated to make. And the biggest plus, the Motorola suggested list price of $499.95, optional with dealer. From the makers of Quasar. Quasar! By Motorola.
You can't taste the power of Levoris, can you?
It tastes good.
You can't feel the power of Levoris, can you?
No, Levoris is pleasant.
You can't taste it, but the power is there. There to control bad breath. You see, Levoris, the mouthwash more dentists use, is just as powerful, just as effective against bad breath as the leading antiseptic brand, even though it tastes good.
I didn't know that.
A lot of people don't know it, but Levoris is powerful. It just happens to taste good.
Honey.
Hello, sweetheart. So they wouldn't fix the Javelin today, huh?
No, it's fixed.
Radio goes on the blink. You got to take it back tomorrow, right?
It's fixed, honey.
I know. The same old runaround. 2-bit part, fortune for labor. All right, when do we get the bill?
Honey, it was free.
I'm going to take the day off tomorrow. You should never go down there alone.
Jonathan, what would I ever do without you?
I don't know, sweetheart.
American Motors Buyer Protection Plan. If we weren't building them better, we couldn't back them better.
If you ever suffer from acid indigestion, this little tablet contains one of the most effective medicines ever discovered for it. In tests at a famous college, it proved to neutralize excess acid in a matter of seconds. Prepared for a little shock, it's Tums, now in 5 flavors. It'll make your stomach feel better now.
The chummy dealing between big business and big government has been the object of a lot of criticism lately. ITT's alleged give and take with the Nixon administration is just one case in point. There are more. Lockheed, Penn Central. But big business and smaller government, what about them? Well, take a look at a story we call Company Town. It is also held up to public scrutiny in the current issue of Harper's Magazine. Company Town is a pallid stereotype that obscures the fear and intrigue and alleged collusion that hang about the paper mill town of St. Mary's, Georgia. What 60 Minutes came across when we went down to take a look inside St. Mary's is a story out of Tennessee Williams with overtones of Peyton Place thrown in.
St. Mary's is tucked into the southeast corner of backwoods Georgia, just across from Florida. They say the Spanish explorers came through here looking for the fountain of youth. At a quick glance, it seems a gentle, gracious southern town. It's pay slow, it's people-friendly. But the whistle of the Gilman paper mill quickly shatters the illusion. That and the acrid smell of hydrogen sulfide seeping across the trees and fields and into the homes along St. Mary's placid streets. Gilman's is not a modest operation. Its net worth is estimated, depending on who's doing the estimating, at between $40 million and $200 million. Almost all of the 5,000 St. Marians who have jobs work for the mill. The mill, in a sense, is the main character in our story. The others? George Brumley, the most powerful man in town, the most powerful man in Camden County, Georgia, because he runs the mill. Brumley's closest ally, Robert Harrison. He is the attorney for the mill, attorney for the town of St. Mary's. Until he was defeated in the last election, he was also state legislator for the district. Suzanne Bloodworth, a St. Mary's teenager, who leveled charges of rape against her doctor, who had defeated lawyer Harrison in that last election.
In spite of his being, in a sense, found innocent of your charges, you still swear that he...
He did it.
If he did it, why did you go back to him after he did it? You went back to him to have your throat examined?
I was scared, but I was kind of infatuated with him. It was sort of a 15-year-old crush. I thought I was in love or something.
The man alleged to have committed the rape, the man who defeated lawyer Harrison, Dr. Carl Drury. A former St. Mary's policeman until he was fired from his job, a friend and supporter of Carl Drury, Buddy Dietz.
The feeling you get by living and working in St. Mary's would be something I would think similar to maybe being in prison, other than they didn't have any guns on you.
The story revolves around Dr. Carl Drury. He is 32 years old, has an attractive wife, is the father of 5 children, drives a Lincoln Continental, and lives in one of the most comfortable homes in town.
Taking that medicine I gave you before?
Yes, sir.
But back in 1970, he decided to get into politics, to run for Robert Harrison's seat in the legislature. He ran against the mill. He said it was a polluter, that it didn't pay enough in taxes, that it stifled free speech in St. Mary's, and that Robert Harrison was the agent of the mill in all of its allegedly antisocial acts. You've painted a picture of the Gilman Paper Company as a kind of a monster brooding over this town, holding the town in an iron grip.
It's unfortunately been that, and it doesn't need to be that way. That company could prosper and benefit more by being a good citizen, by treating people fairly and well. There's no one here, me or anyone else, that wouldn't fight to protect that company if it would simply live up to its obligations like every other citizen here is required to do.
Well, Drury defeated Harrison, defeated the mill. And that angered George Brumley, the mill manager, who feared that Drury, as state representative, would introduce legislation hostile to the mill. Brumley agreed to receive us, but on the subject of Carl Drury, he was not an especially cooperative witness. He accused Drury of waging a personal vendetta. What's in it for him to conduct this personal vendetta that you allege?
Mike, I have no other comment on the point.
It's just he's out to get George Brumley or Bob Harrison or whomever?
I have no other comment.
Well, you say, I mean, you charge that it's a personal vendetta, but then you don't want to say why it's a personal vendetta.
I'm not interested in becoming involved in a detailed discussion with regard to personal relationships with Dr. Carl Drury.
But several Gilman employees told us that those personal relationships involved trying to beat Drury in the election, trying to keep him from being seated after he had won, and harassing him right up till today. Former policeman Buddy Dietz says that he was told by St. Mary's Mayor Daley, who works for the mill, and by Police Chief Watts, to keep Drury under surveillance during the election campaign.
Well, St. Mary's police force was used just as if the Gilman Paper Company or George Brumley owned them. They were working for him. I was told on several instances, and this was by Daley and also by Watts, to watch Carl Drury, see what time he came into St. Mary's at night or what time he left out, or see who he might be with.
Mayor Daley denies the allegation. As we said, Drury won that election back in 1970, but he found his trouble had just begun. 2 days before he was to take his seat in the Georgia legislature, he was charged with sexual assault, rape, by one of his young patients, Suzanne Bloodworth, who was then only 15 years old. The doctor had assaulted her in her hospital room, she said in her affidavit, on the evening of the day he had performed a tonsillectomy on her. Suzanne's affidavit was drawn up in the office of lawyer Robert Harrison. But there were one or two strange things about Suzanne's story. Though the rape allegedly took place in March of 1970, she told no one about it till the following November. And after she got out of the hospital, it turned out that Suzanne had gone back to Dr. Drury for post-operative treatment.
Yes, I
To
did.
have him examine you.
Yes, I did.
Just a couple of days after that,
Yes, I did.
in spite of the fact that he had attacked you against your will.
Yes, I did.
Why?
Because I was scared.
Scared of?
Him.
So you went back because you were scared of him.
Mm-hmm. I didn't know what he would do. Whether he would say something
To whom?
that was... I don't know who he would say it to, but I was so confused about everything.
One of Suzanne's friends, Vanessa Carter, claimed to have witnessed the rape. She was in the next bed. But she, too, told no one about it until she told Robert Harrison 5 months later. And she, too, went back to Dr. Drury for post-operative treatment.
A man that you thought was crazy, a man that you thought was a sex maniac, and yet you go to his office and you're with him in his office alone, not once, but twice after.
No, I wasn't alone with him. Suzanne was in the room with me one time.
And the other time you were alone with him.
Mm-hmm. But one of the women that worked in the office there with him was around us constantly.
Now, you told your born daddy after all this happened, you said, oh, Daddy, it's not so, it's just politics.
That's what he says. Everyone in town knows that my father has to be the biggest liar to ever hit St. Mary's.
Dr. Drury was cleared of the rape charge by a grand jury. But Suzanne Bloodworth's father, who works for the mill, was not satisfied. He confronted Drury in the parking lot outside this building, the Gilman Hospital, one evening as the doctor was leaving. Drury and 3 nurses who say they witnessed the scene swear that Bloodworth attacked Drury with a blunt instrument. Bloodworth has a different version.
Mr. Bloodworth, why did you go to the hospital after Carl Drury?
Mr. Wallace, I went by there, I saw his car as I went to the ball field. And this was a spur-of-the-moment deal to talk to him to see about him leaving my daughter alone.
You did not attack him?
I did not attack him, no.
How did he get hurt?
He fell, running.
Running?
It had rained that night, and he ran out on the gravel. And I don't know whether he had leather shoes on or what, but every time he'd make a cut, he'd fall in the gravel, and he'd roll, get up and run again.
Wait, you were chasing him?
Oh, sure.
With a blunt instrument?
No.
Why? I mean, he's a big, tough fellow. Why would he want to run away from a little fellow like you?
As far as I'm concerned, when it comes to my daughter, there's nobody too tough here.
Bloodworth was apprehended by policeman Buddy Dietz. Dietz was fired from the St. Mary's police force 6 days later. Mayor Daley says that Dietz was fired for insubordination. Dietz thinks otherwise.
They found out that I was not, so to speak, true to them, or my loyalty to them wasn't the type that they needed. So I was let go. I was no longer any use for them, because rather than being a spy or a pimp for them, then I was on the wrong side of the fence, so to speak.
In any event, Bloodworth was acquitted, despite the testimony of the nurses who were eyewitnesses. Drury backers point out that 9 of the 12 jury members either worked for the mill or had close ties to it. But Dietz is not the only friend of Carl Drury who lost his job. Another is Brian Lynn. He had worked at Gilman for almost 9 years when he was abruptly fired.
My personal belief is because of my close personal relationship and friendship with Dr. Carl Drury.
Simply
that I was used to as a warning to others.
Well, then let me understand. What was your relationship with Carl Drury? Now, did you help him politically?
No, sir. I voted against Dr. Carl Drury. His father, who is now dead, was a real personal friend of mine and asked me to help keep his boy, or his word was our boy, out of politics. And the least I could do for the father was to vote against his son to keep him out of politics.
Well, then why in the world would they fire you for a political reason, which is what you believe they fired you for?
Have you ever had a scapegoat, the word scapegoat used? I figure I was a scapegoat for him. I was the one that, who was a personal friend of Dr. Carl Drury's, who, by such close friendship and all, that I was set up as an example for others. If you don't do this, see what happened to Brian Lynn. I have a good work record with the company. I had a good work record with the company.
Are they a benevolent master?
To their chosen ones, yes. But who wants to be on the chosen one all the time? You've got a mind of your own. I put 3 years, 3 months, and 3 days in the Navy, and I don't kiss nobody's. They take care of their own. But if you ever vary from that policy of being taken care of, you are out the door. I'm not the first one, and if something don't change, I won't be the last one.
When we asked George Brumley about why Brian Lynn had been let go, he said it was due to slack business. I suggested that business had gotten a good deal better since.
Well, Mike, I really have no interest in discussing personalities and why we chose not to rehire.
But he was laid off purely for economic reasons and not for political reasons.
That is correct.
Well, I confess then I find it difficult to understand. If he was laid off for economic and not for political reasons, then he ought to be rehired, one might think, for economic and not for political reasons.
Well, once again, I say that I'm not interested in discussing that particular point.
What sort of loyalty do you expect from your executives as far as politics are concerned? Candid.
The principal loyalty that we expect from our executives is not to adopt or take an anti-company position.
What does that mean?
Just what I said.
Well, then what is an anti-company position that you would not find acceptable from one of your executives?
An anti-company position would be a position of publicly being for people who are anti-company and taking an anti-company position.
Is Carl Drury anti-company?
He has been, yes.
Anytime you're on salary and you take and go and oppose top management where it affects their economics, you're apt to get in trouble.
St. Mary's Mayor Richard Daley. He too works for the mill, and Carl Drury charges he is nothing but a tool of the Gilman Company.
It's been whispered out the community, Mr. Wallace, that there are other salaried people that get along well with Mr. Drury.
It's been whispered?
Yes.
Well, why do you have to whisper that you're a friend of Carl Drury's if you're a salaried employee at the mill?
Well, he spoke against the company, he spoke against this community.
Spoke against the community?
Well, he says that this community is owned by Gilman Paper Company.
There are those who suggest that living in a company town means that you work for the company and, in a certain sense, your mind and heart. Your political affiliation is bought by the company.
I don't believe there's any place in America that's that way, Mike. I got confidence in Americans, and Americans are not going to let anyone take control of their minds. They're free people.
Actually, we found that fear of taking an anti-company position was common among Gilman employees, both executives and workers. They're afraid to speak out on politics, pollution, or taxes. One of the city's 3 tax assessors told us that he'd lose his job at the mill if he tried to challenge the Gilman Company's low tax rate of only $45,000. Paranoia is so widespread among Drury's supporters that some are even reluctant to use their telephones for fear they're tapped. As small-town fate would have it, attorney Robert Harrison, attorney for the mill, attorney for St. Mary's, lives right across the shaded street from Carl Drury, the man who beat him. Drury feels that Harrison has been masterminding the continuing effort to discredit him, that it was Harrison who orchestrated the rape charges. And Harrison acknowledges that young Vanessa Carter told him about the hospital episode with Suzanne Bloodworth months before the charges were actually brought.
If you knew the charges against Drury, and you were the attorney for the Gilman Hospital, why didn't you bring charges against the doctor who was practicing at the Gilman Hospital?
This was a judgment matter that I made This information was given to me by one individual who is a witness to this matter. It was not given to me by the person that was involved. I did discuss it with proper officials. That's an attorney-client relationship, and I, of course, cannot go into that. But it was my understanding that she gave this information to me for the purpose of informing me. A political campaign was underway. I did not want to go into that. I had no reason to go into that because this was the only person who had discussed it with me at that time.
Well, after the election and after you'd lost the election, why didn't you try to get him out of the hospital?
I had no reason to do that.
Well, he works in the Gilman Hospital. He is allegedly molesting young female patients in the hospital. You're the attorney for the Gilman Hospital. One would think that the better part of public spirit would immediately get this sex maniac out of the Gilman Hospital.
Mike, I am not the district attorney for this area. My representation of Gilman Hospital is a civil matter.
And so as the attorney for Gilman Hospital, in spite of the fact that you'd known about it for months and didn't move on it, finally, 4 or 5 months later, 2 days before Drury is to enter the legislature, you decided the time was to move as the attorney for Gilman Hospital.
I made no such decision, Mike. As I've stated to you, I did not represent Mr. Bloodworth in this matter. He had his own counsel that represented him.
The Gilman Paper Company pays $45,000 in taxes to this city, or about $45,000 in taxes to this city, correct?
Well, if this is your statement, I'll take your word for it.
Is that enough?
Is that enough? That question will have to be answered by the Board of Tax Assessors, not by me.
The tax assessors, the Board of Tax Assessors, all 3 members of it work for the Gilman Paper Company.
Well, I couldn't tell you who they are, Mike, but if you say
and one of them told us that if he were to tamper with the tax rate for the Gilman Paper Company, he'd be out of a job faster than he could turn around.
Oh, well, of course, I'm not aware of that. You have information that I don't have, obviously.
Is it reasonable for him to believe that?
I wouldn't think so.
What would you like to see happen to Carl Drury?
I would like to see Carl Drury make a very good representative for this district. I would like to help him be a good representative for this district.
So as far as you're concerned, he is your neighbor, and you wish him good luck?
I wish him well.
The Department of Justice in Washington has begun to look into what's happening in St. Mary's. They're trying to determine if Carl Drury's civil rights have been infringed upon. And so a federal grand jury convenes next Monday, a week from tomorrow, in Savannah to consider all of the charges and countercharges in the affair of the Gilman Mill, Robert Harrison, Carl Drury, and St. Mary's, the company town.